Hey guys and girls, welcome back to BBR Suspension. So in the last video we managed to finish the top A-arms for the 1963 904 Porsche. So what I've done for the bottom ones, I've basically cut the tubes to length, okay, and what I've done is I've marked the point that we've got to line up with the start edge on the bend on the die. I think we're going to try and bend these, however I do think that we might need to actually cut them longer because the follower block doesn't sit close enough. So if we don't get, it's a very small bend angle, it's only about 17 degrees, but what we're going to do, according to Bend Tech, there shouldn't be an issue, but I think that we might run into a trouble where the follower block doesn't, or as it starts drawing the tubing through, this end is going to unlatch, if I can call it that for a better word. It might not be long enough to get through the follower block. Like I said, it's a very small angle, so we're literally putting a 17-degree kink in the tube. And the main reason why the tube has got a kink in it is that on the original design they used the straight tube, but at full lock what would happen is the wheel weights on the inside of the rim would get knocked off by the tube. So that's the reason why there's a kink in the tube. So what I'm going to do, I've cut the 4 tubes and I've marked them up, but I do think that we may run into a little bit of trouble on the bending. If it happens, I'll have to just recut them and make them a little bit longer. What I've also done off camera in the interim is I've 3D printed 2 coping templates. So the first template is basically the one that goes onto the pivot bush, or where the tube goes onto the pivot bush. So you can see the angle is pretty sort of similar to the top ones. It is slightly different, so I've printed a completely different one for this one. And then the second template that I've printed is quite an interesting one because this goes onto the spherical bearing carrier. So the 2 tubes will come together, so there'll be a flat where the 2 tubes join. You're going to have one tube going in one direction and the other tube going in the other direction, like that. So that one will mark, and then the tubes will be welded onto the actual bearing carrier, and it'll get a weld across the center as well where the 2 tubes join. So what I've also done, obviously, which you'll have seen, is the actual grease nipple on the holder. So what we're going to do, we're going to head over to the bender now, and we're going to try, and on the drawing you'll see it's a very small kink in the tube, okay, which prevents the wheel weights getting knocked off. And on this side there's an angle for the tube to run this way, and then that, so the bend that we've got to put in is the difference between the 2 angles, which, like I say, is approximately 17 degrees. So we'll head over to the bender, we'll get it set up. We'll try with one. If we're successful, I'll bend the other 4. If it doesn't make it through the follower, then what I'll do is I'll add on maybe 50 or 100 mils onto each tube, which we can just cut off afterwards when we do the coping. So we'll move over to the bender and let's get cracking with the bends. Right guys, so what I'm going to do, I'm putting a little bit of the bending lube on the follower block rather than the tube, because we are literally going to draw it a very, very short distance through, so I think it's probably better to get a little bit on the follower block. I might put some on the tube just for the luck of the draw. So what we'll do, we'll check, we're going to do seam of the pipe to the inside. So I'll put a little bit of the lube on the outside. And we can just make sure that it draws smoothly through the follower. A little bit of lube like that, just to help it slide through that follower block. So what we'll do, we'll line up the mark that I made with the edge of the die. we'll get the hoop on, retaining hoop, and then what I'm going to do, I'll get the follower block through. There we go. We'll get a little bit of tension on that, and then we can tighten up. So on the back end of the follower block, we've currently got approximately, I'm going to say, probably about 12 to 13 millimeters that can get drawn through. Just making sure that the seam is lined up, so we'll nip up the pinch bolt. Just to hold the tube. We'll get a bit of tension. So we've got to do a 17-degree bend, which is really not much. So I think we might just make this, but let's give it a bash, see if it works. So we've got our indicator set on 0. What we'll do is we'll give it a ratchet. So we're on 10 degrees now. Take it to 15, 16, 17. That is 17 degrees. I'll give it a smidge more because of the spring back. (17 degrees), and we haven't jumped out of the follower block, so that is a good sign. Like I said, I was a little bit concerned that it might pop out, but so far it seems to be working perfectly. What we'll do, we can get the follower block, just release the tension. Follower block moved back. Loosen the pinch bolt. And there we have it. So that's the small kink. Like I say, a very minuscule bend in the tube. But what that'll do is that'll prevent the wheel weights being knocked off the rim at full lock. So I'll clean that up and I'll get the next one and we can carry on with the next tube. It's basically a case of wash, rinse and repeat on all four. Once I've got all four bent, we'll be able to do the coping on the tubes, and then the next stage will be to weld up some jigs. But let's get the tubes bent for now. Right guys, so we've got the second tube set up in the bender. Just going to make sure that the pinch bolt is tight. We've got our indicator on 0. So we're going to bend this to 17 degrees, same as we did the previous one. See, yeah, that is 17 degrees, perfect. So we'll do the other two. I'm going to just do them off camera. Right guys, so we've basically got all 4 tubes bent up. They're pretty much all the same. Okay, so what we're going to do, I'm going to mark the coping templates next. Okay, so you can see that'll be the kind of configuration of the tubes, and the kink in the tube is going to prevent wheel weights being knocked off. So what we'll do is we're going to mark one at a time. So I've 3D printed the coping templates. So effectively we'll just slide them over the tube, line up, we'll line up the tangent at the top with the seam of the tube. Like that. So that specific one is going to be where the pivot bush comes in. Okay, and then what we'll do is the bottom one will slip on and that is going to be where the spherical bearing holder goes on. So what we're going to do, we're going to mark them just with a standard Sharpie pen, Koki if you're in South Africa, that's what they're known as here. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll just mark the line. We mark through on the other side because I do profile them at a slight angle so that they'll wrap around like that. And then we'll mark the opposite side. So once we take the coping templates off and we start grinding, we literally grind away until such time that it's just a sliver of the blue line that remains, and then we can check it up against the actual spherical bearing holder or the pivot bush, and we can just profile and chamfer them on the inside slightly so that we get a nice tight fit. So that's how we do it. What I'll basically do is just slide these off. Okay, that one, the ink didn't dry quite enough before I took it off, but that one you can see the profile is marked. So we'll probably use a grinder and just cut the majority out, and then with a pneumatic power file, we'll file the rest out and get the profile done. This side I'll just wipe off and I'll just remark it because I didn't give the ink enough time to dry, so I'll do that off camera and I'll mark the rest, and then I'll show you how I profile these parts. how we do the coping. You can see that is the side that is going on to the spherical bearing housing. So there will be a join there, other tube joining, spherical bearing housing there, and that is the side going on to the pivot point. And that's how we do it. So I'll knock out the other three and then we'll get cracking with the jigs.